2021. Bienvenue au Sommet du Coaching 2021. Today, Janet Davy and from GLD Management and David Leblanc from Leblanc Leadership Group, both like me from Vancouver and the West Coast, will be hosting today's event on team coaching. Aujourd'hui, Janet Davy et David Leblanc vont nous faire une présentation sur le coaching d'équipe. Mon nom est Alexandre et je serai le producteur de cette session. My name is Alexandre and I'll be the producer of this session. First, I would like to start by beginning to do the acknowledgement that the land where we live and where I'm working is within the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. As this is broadcast across Canada, I invite you to take the time to acknowledge the traditional territory where you are. J'aimerais commencer par reconnaître que l'endroit où nous vivons et où je travaille présentement est situé sur le territoire traditionnel Coast Salish, les terres non cédées des Premières Nations Musqueam, Squamish et Tsleil-Waututh. Comme notre présentation est diffusée partout à travers le Canada, je vous invite à prendre le temps de reconnaître les Premières Nations où vous êtes situés. And to you now, Janet and David.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Alexandre. Well, hello and welcome. David and I are both delighted to be here with you today. For the next 90 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit or a lot about team coaching and some of the advantages. David, if you could please introduce yourself to the group.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Very excited to be here as well. And in spite of the name, folks, I do apologize. I do not speak French. Janet, I've worked in a variety of settings, both public and private sector, with the majority of my career focused on operations. And I've been working as a coach for the last 6-7 years officially, although I believe it was always a part of my practice, even when I led people within the organizations that I worked with. And while individual coaching is a really important element of my practice, I'm finding myself spending more and more time working as a team coach, with a focus on making impactful and sustainable change. More often than not, when I'm working with an individual, I find that a lot of the challenges, opportunities, gaps, blind spots that they're bringing to the one-on-one sessions somehow involve another relationship, whether it's at home, in the office, part of the team. So as a result, that's what's created that shift that I started making, doing more work with teams than with individuals. Janet's going to talk about this a little bit later, but individual coaching can be a very powerful intervention. But sometimes what we find is that when we're coaching an individual and they come up with all kinds of tactics and strategies to bring back to the office, we find sometimes that they sort of bump against the system. And while they have the best intentions, they have great plans, it's not always easy to create change. So what Janet and I are finding is that by working with the team as a whole and supporting them, they're then able to build that capacity as a group, and it makes it a little bit more safe and comfortable for the individuals within the team. So that's all I'm going to say to sort of kick off my piece, and I'll turn it back to you, Janet.
Okay, so that was our presentation. Thank you, David. As for me, I'm a professionally certified coach and an executive coach. And like David, I too have a leadership and team development company, JLD Management. My career was spent working my way up to get my chartered professional accountant. And I've worked in government organizations, but mostly messy private organizations. So I too kind of see a great benefit to team coaching and how to build a really solid team. So, and as you know, our topic today is team coaching. And our wish for everyone here is that you will leave knowing more about the subject and that you will consider how team coaching could work for you and your team. So many times we've heard from leaders, both of us, How can I improve my team's effectiveness? Our answer is a resounding with team coaching. This is the most effective way in terms of time, investment, and effort. This is an interactive session. We will pose questions throughout, and we want to hear from you. David, slide 3, please. We do apologize in advance. Our presentation language today is in English. Though if you have questions during our time together, please type them into the chat. There are people here who will answer for you and help us out. Slide 4. Oh, that's the agenda. So that's perfect. Thank you, David.
And just for folks, if you feel more comfortable following along in French, we haven't provided the complete presentation, but we have put a PDF in the chat box, which you can download, and it has some of the salient speaking notes translated into French. I won't mention any names, but we'd really like to thank a fellow colleague who also works for the federal government based out of Ontario for assisting in the translation, just so that you can follow along.
Yes, thank you, fellow colleague. We're hoping that you're online right now. So looking at the agenda, here's how we'll spend our time. 3 main topics. Why team coaching? Team coaching versus individual coaching. A brief description of team coaching contrasted with individual coaching. Theory and practice of team coaching. Best practice when initiating team coaching into your team and organization. Stories of team coaching, outcomes of team coaching engagements, both David and I will share with you. But before we get started, we'd like to have you let us know in your mind, what is the best element or the one single element that makes a great team? If you could type that in the chat, that would just be awesome. We'll be reading them quickly as they come by. So what single element makes a great team in your opinion? Listening, trust, communication, mutual respect, synergy, respect, psychological safety, great leadership, teamwork, collaboration, collaboration again, innovation, alignment, respect. Boy, that's a lot of great words coming up there. Transparency, sharing. Thank you all very much. Slide 5, David, please. What makes a great team? I'm going to give you my explanation or our explanation and what the theory says. So many of us have called our work groups teams. Let's pause and think about that for a moment. In our experience, both David and I have been in so many so-called executive teams. Believe me, those were not teams. There was often unhealthy competition for the next promotion, or at least looking for individual recognition. We believe there is a better way. Team members supporting each other as they work towards a common goal. Doesn't that sound great? All focused on achieving this goal together. Think about it. In team sports, the coaches are there to encourage healthy development and good sportsmanship. Together, everyone wins the game. It is the same in business, creating a strong team who are competent, confident, connected, and are there for the team's success. Slide 6. David, do you have a question to ask there? No? So let's have a little bit of a discussion. I think we got it here from everyone understanding exactly. It's transparency, flexibility, all of those pieces. Respect. I saw also psychological safety, which we're going to dig into a little bit later. Slide 7.
Is it not moving ahead for you, Janet?
I don't see it. No, slide 7. we're on, I don't know where the heck we are now. We've gone far ahead. ICF is what I'm looking for.
Yep. Okay, it's showing on mine. I'm hoping it's showing.
Got it now. Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Thank
Sorry,
you very
there must
much.
have been a time delay there. Sorry, folks.
Oh, that's all right. No problem. So the ICF and team coaching. So the International Coaching Federation, or the ICF, and the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, the EMCC, have worked diligently to bring structure and coach accreditation to team coaching. For clarity, a few definitions are here. So how they're defining these things. A group is a collection of people with something in common. Group coaching is partnering with a group of individuals who share a common interest, learning experience, or skill, where the coach and other group members offer support and inspiration to maximize individual abilities and potential. Team, a group of people with a common purpose and shared goals who work interdependently in a shared context. Team facilitation, engaging a team through guided participation to discover, foster, and apply insights to enhance team process and team effectiveness. And then we go on to team coaching, and it really is the Cadillac. Team coaching, partnering in a cooperative, co-creative, and reflective process with a team and its dynamics and relationships in a way that inspires them to maximize their abilities and potential in order to reach their common purpose and shared goals. Just a note, team coaching does not equal leader behavior. Slide 8, please, David. There, that worked perfectly. Thank you. So, two definitions of team coaching as expressed by John Katzenbach and Peter Hawkins. A small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, set of performance goals, and shared approach for which they hold each other mutually accountable, and which has ways of effectively meeting and communicating that raise morale and alignment, effectively engaging with all the team stakeholders, stakeholder groups, and ways that individuals and team can continually learn and develop. Over these next few slides, we'll set the stage, compare and contrast individual coaching with team coaching. In my experience, being a member of a team, a true functioning team, is vastly different than being in a group. There is a responsibility for each and every member to bring their A game. It means there is a common goal or goals. Some of the most important features of a team seem like common sense, though often they are overlooked in a group. Communication, coordination, equal contributions by members, mutual support, and effort are all required to have a successful, functioning team. This doesn't just happen. It takes effort and focus and support to change the way we've always done it. Here's a simple definition of a team. A group of individuals with a common purpose, the same stakeholders, and a desire, I should say a strong desire to improve the team outcomes. Forward focused, not hung up on mistakes, learning from them instead. Over to you, David.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Janet. So building a little bit further on what Janet was sharing, we thought it was important to share one of the many, many models out there that talk about and help us understand what the elements or characteristics are of an effective team. there's so much research out there, and I'm sure that within each of your teams, organizations, depending on where you're dispersed around the country, you probably have different definitions or ideas of this. But we wanted to show you one model. So these next two slides that we're going to look at is the Watson's characteristics of high-performing teams. So, of course, one of the first elements is strong leadership. Having a leader who can establish a good vision or an image of what the team is, what they stand for, what's important to them, ensuring that they understand their role, the scope of their role, creating a sense of purpose, and reinforcing that throughout the lifespan of the team. It's really important as leaders that we have the ability to harness the power of our teams and support people as they grow and develop and guide them in the work they do. But at the same time, it's also important as leaders that we can sort of ebb and flow and step back from being the one who is driving things forward, getting things done, and stepping back into a more facilitative space. Right membership. So do the members of the team have the knowledge, the skills, the ability to deliver on what they're supposed to do? Is there a diversity of thought, perspective, and style in order to get things done and to be able to support one another and challenge one another as they do that? Structure and processes. So it's really important that we have good processes in place as a team, and we understand how to follow them, and as well that they're not too onerous, too overbearing, that they sort of take over everything else. Because sometimes if processes are so strong and entrenched, it restricts our ability to be flexible and to be able to move as things change. Effective team dynamics, and this is oftentimes as coaches where we spend a lot of time helping folks understand the accepted patterns of behavior, what's in line with the values of the team. Is this a trusting environment? Is this a psychologically safe environment? Is this a space where we encourage dialogue, collaboration, curiosity? Two words you'll probably hear me say a lot as I'm speaking to you today are patterns and curiosity. Those things come up often within the work that I do. Then if we move on, sorry, and I didn't move the next slide as I move these on. The last two are growth mindset. So this is about how does the team invest in developing and encouraging growth within the team. And it's important here when we think of growth mindset is that we don't always rely on the leader, the organization, to create the space and create the culture for this. A growth mindset also shows up in our individual contribution and our individual desire and commitment to learn and to grow. And then lastly, shared sense of purpose and value. This work that I just shared you of Watson's is very aligned with the work of Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck. And Janet, in the description that she gave earlier on of a team, that is actually from that work. And really at the core of a team's effectiveness is having a good understanding of this, of their purpose, their value, and how they're contributing. Without teams having this clarity and this understanding around this, it's almost impossible to have the other 5 factors that we listed here be successful. So it's really foundational piece of any work that we do. And oftentimes in the work that Janet and I do, this is where we start, really getting clarity. Having this helps folks have a clear understanding of what they're responsible, the decisions they're able to make, understanding the risks associated with working that team. And when we think of the complex world that we live in, and I think the last 18 months has just been a really great example of each of you work on teams, you work in organizations within the federal government where without any interruptions, there's a lot of complexity to the work that you do and the services that you provide. Throw in a pandemic and things just went wild for a lot of folks. So when we think about purpose and value and vision and the complexity of the world that we're living in, this is also something that as a team, we should revisit quite regularly, just to make sure that we're on track, we're aligned. If there's any shifts or adjustments, that we're constantly sort of adjusting with the ebb and flow of the various internal and external factors that impact us. And in spite of having a strong purpose, vision, folks are really in alignment, there still can be challenges. There still can be blind spots. So as team coaches, our goal is to work with teams, helping them to identify their strengths, what they do well, in addition to those gaps that may exist, and how those gaps may derail the team's effectiveness or ability to achieve on the objectives or outcomes that they have. So Janet and I do want to apologize because it's a webinar format, and right now we have about 70 folks. A lot of our interaction is via the chat. Typically, we like to get other voices here and people on video to share. So at the end of the session, there will be a chance to ask questions, and we will invite a few folks if we have time to get their voices into the room. But to try and get you involved in the best way that we can, we just wanted to throw it out into the chat. And we'd like you to think about your team experiences. Could be current, could be previous team experiences. And first, we'd like you to just throw into the chat, what are some of the things that are effective and have worked well with the teams that you've been a part in? So just give you a few moments to think about that.
David, could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yes, current, so past or present, what are some of the team experiences you have had that have worked well? What are some positive aspects of the teams that you've been a part of? And just as folks are thinking, I see Tammy shared a comment. Tammy Carroll, thank you. Had a chance to see a webinar from David Clutterbuck. Yes, David does some amazing work, and that systemic lens to team coaching is something that's really integrated into Janet and Mai's practice as well. What else are we seeing? Great communications, mutual respect, openness. I love that when everyone's voice is welcome and validated. Thanks, Carol. Sharing challenges, equal opportunity to contribute. Love it. Things are just flying by. I'm trying to catch a few.
I see them.
People who care about each other. That's a nice comment. I've studied with Barry Oshry, and he uses the two terms around working in teams about power and love. And he said, you can't have too much of one or too much of the other. You need to have a balance. And I think that's something that we need to integrate into our language a little bit more, perhaps, than we do in teams, is this idea of care and love. It's a really critical part of who we are as human beings. Regular opportunities to come together, have mutually supportive ideas built on, sharing ideas of each one's projects, chemistry, I like that. Making people feel they're valued. So it sounds like, from what we're hearing, that folks have had some very positive experiences working on teams. And we all know human nature, the minute you have two people in a room and there's a relationship, there's a chance for conflict or challenges. So perhaps now, could we get folks to share in the chat, thinking of past or present teams, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced?
No one's experienced any.
This is a safe space. Competition, judgment, lack of participation, not feeling heard. Ooh, sabotage, yeah.
When someone felt excluded.
Aggressive, counterproductive interactions, team leaders who don't lead, not sharing information, transparency, yeah, that's a big one. Bullying, yeah. Gossip. Yeah, and unfortunately, this is the reality of teams. And this is what we alluded to at the beginning when we talked about one of the differences between individual and team coaching is that sometimes when you're dealing with some of these things, it's a lot of responsibility on an individual to have to go into the organization, to have to go into the team and try and influence change. And this is where team coaching, or Janet and myself in the work that we do, can help to create the environment for the team to deal with some of these challenges. Thank you, folks, for all those notes. Could I share the SurveyMonkey link again? Absolutely. And folks, we're going to share the SurveyMonkey link at the end of the program as well. We recognize we want to keep you engaged in this process. So if you don't have time to do it during the session, we'll put it in right at the end so that you can open it up and have it on your desktop. 3 questions, just a few minutes. And it's actually collecting some of the same information that you shared in the chat here today. So building on, just sort of moving my notes here, I'm just going to pop these in. Building on this idea of systemic coaching and a systems thinking mindset, we wanted to share with you, as we were looking through the list of challenges and some of the things that folks may have experienced in the past, we wanted to share with you the typical approach of a leader when dealing with a team. So oftentimes, there's this human nature to fix the problem. Some leaders, they like to take on a lot of responsibility. Barry Osh would say they suck up the responsibility. They think they need to have the answer for everything. I'm sure maybe 1 or 2 of you have experienced that working with a team. This idea of maintaining a control. So there could be a variety of reasons that maybe people are feeling pressure from above. Maybe they're feeling fear of not having all the answers. Maybe they're feeling threatened because I'm the leader, but there's this new guy on the team and he's really smart. So I'm going to try and keep control to sort of keep on top of these things. And leaders at times would desperately try and keep control, sometimes even pursuing the wrong path because they're so focused that they're not noticing some of the opportunities that are available. This idea of discrete solutions. So careful, guarded, avoiding creativity and innovation, perhaps trying not to draw attention to themselves or the team. Let's just keep our head down and kind of do what we're doing. Predicted outcomes. If we go this way, there's going to be no surprises. This is the way we have always done things. Has anyone heard that before? Yeah. Static processes and procedures. Let's stick to what we know. It may not be as efficient, but at least we can control the narrative this way. We're in control of what's happening. Hierarchical communication. So comes down from the top. They know best. We're doing exactly what we're told. We're not questioning things. We're not going to rock the boat. One of the fascinating things about hierarchical communication, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is that it creates an environment of low accountability. Well, this is what I was told to do. No one told me to do anything different. So again, this top-down communication, we see that, and there can be negative impacts to the system. And then lastly, oops, I was behind on my clicks. Lastly, this idea of seeking certainty. So we don't have time to experiment. We don't have time to research. What's the shortest path between A and B? So you can see with all of these approaches, they tend to be quite static, quite controlled, quite contained. So this is often, this linear approach is often what we see and experience in teams. On the flip side, from a systemic view, we'll go into a little bit of detail about what the flip side of these are. So understanding the context, this is about taking on a more systemic lens. What might we learn? I often use this expression of zooming in and zooming out. So in a controlled environment, I'm quite narrowly focused on here. What would happen if before I made a decision or before I advised the team to do something, if I stepped back, I zoomed really far out and just sort of took a look at what's going on? What are some of the variables? What bits of information can I grab? Took that information, zoomed back into the problem that we're focused on. What might that look like? And how might that shift our approach? How might it impact our actions? Shifting to enabling, liberating, or empowering, just making sure that's showing up on the slide there. how can I, as a leader, get out of the way of my people? How can I create the space for them to do what they need to do? And from a coaching perspective, and as an individual coach, I will often ask folks this, what might that feel like if you as a leader just stepped back and didn't have all the answers, didn't feel the need to guide and direct the team and what they were doing? Sometimes you'll get some interesting responses, because it can be quite uncomfortable if we have ingrained patterns of behavior around control and keeping things contained. Interconnected solutions. So again, this idea of recognizing that there are many external and internal factors and elements, and they all impact what we do. And the more we're able to zoom out, the more we're able to see and understand those. And it's important to note that it doesn't necessarily mean that what we've been doing in the past is wrong. And in some cases, we may take the exact same steps that we would have before, but it creates this space of giving us options and things to explore so that we feel more confident and comfortable with the solution that we move forward. Oops, clicky, there we go. Emergent and evolving outcomes. So how can we create a space where there's flexibility, we're able to adapt to the systems, we're able to adapt to the environment as it changes around us? How do we create this space where we're not so stuck on we must do things this way, and we're able to sort of flex and move? I don't know if there are any bakers on the session, but think of baking bread, and that's this whole motion of stretching and folding and stretching and folding. And each time you kind of go out, you collect information and then you bring it back in. And it can be a really powerful way for us to be able to really get a solid understanding of the system around and kind of move out of this small little container, which is our team. Okay. Unbounded communication. This can be a tough one. This can be threatening for us as leaders. No limits, no constraints on how we communicate. No unwritten rules. How many of you have been part of a team where there's sort of the unwritten rules about what's okay to bring up, what's okay to talk about, what's okay to challenge? So what would it be like to be in a space where there is that comfort and that safety to have dialogue, to have conflict, and look at conflict as something creative versus something that's threatening and scary? And lastly, this idea of living with uncertainty, and you can start to see some themes here. We recognize that we don't have all the answers all the time, and we shouldn't have all the answers all the time. So this is a good spot to kind of challenge ourselves. If we feel that we always have the answer, the question we might want to ask ourselves is, what am I missing? There's a quote. I'll go to the next slide here and share this with you. I'm hoping this translated well into French, because I'm going to be honest, I used Google Translate for this one, folks. I apologize. This is from Glenda O'Young from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. And she has a statement that she likes to say, there are no good answers, only good questions. Answers have a short shelf life. So this is the idea when we think of a systemic approach to team and kind of having a systems mindset, is really at its core, it's about curiosity, and having a curiosity, always sort of looking for answers, looking for different perspectives, and pulling that all together so it can inform our next step. Recognizing that the minute we have a solution, the minute we have a decision, the minute we act on something, there's immediately a ripple effect. So that action, while it was the right action at that time, it's no longer relevant because the system's changed. We've made a change, we've made a decision, we've taken action. So we need to start that whole process over about being curious and pulling all of that information together. So our goal, through a combination of various interactions, including team coaching, is to help leaders and teams develop this systemic lens to the work that they do. And not only that, but also, sorry, just moving a note here, understanding how they operate as a team and how it's constantly shifting and moving, and getting comfortable in that space and creating an environment where over time they can actually manage that process themselves. Folks, as we're going, if you do have questions, please pop them in. There will be a chance at the end. We'll try and integrate as we go, but just as you think of things, don't hesitate to pop them in. And Janet, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Slide 16, please. And now is a chance for a little bit of interactivity here. We'd like to check in here and ask a really interesting question. At least David and I thought it was interesting. We'd like a tally of how many people on this webinar have experienced or worked with an individual executive or leadership coach. And it's a simple request. If you could please type the number 1 into the chat if you've worked with a coach previously. Wow, there's a lot of ones coming up. Interesting. Very good, very good. So now just imagine if you had that exponentially working with your teams. What if the number for no? The number for no is 0. Absolutely.
And folks, as you're thinking about working with a coach, for those of you who had, we'd be curious, what have been some of the benefits of working with coaches?
Thanks,
Feel free
David.
to type in the chat.
There's some thinking going on. Helping get unstuck. Thank you. Greater clarity of purpose, clarity and amazing discussions. I think we're going to move on. We're kind of stuck here. Oh, lots of coming now. Personal growth and individual. Yeah, as an individual leader. Great to have someone listen to you. Makes me think. Seeing new perspective, helping planning my career. Very good. Very good. So objective view on my current situation. Ooh, I like that. I like that one a lot. So with all of this in mind, I'd just like to talk a little bit about, we know now that team coaching works with the entire team to stay focused on the stakeholders and the entire system. On the other side of the coin, which is also enormously powerful though, is individual executive leadership coaching for the individual. It's also powerful, though it is for the individual. Both David and I have had many, many great coaching sessions with high achieving leaders who grow and reach their most desired outcomes, promotions, and etc. through our coaching relationships. Though for many years, even decades now, employers, organizations have focused on measuring, managing, and cultivating individual performance. For the most part, performance management programs work, but they work for the individual improvement focus. I love coaching and I love working with individuals one-on-one. It's powerful work, don't get me wrong. We build strong and many times lasting relationships with our coachees. Individual goals and their desired outcomes are reached. You can imagine that as each individual grows and changes through their individual coaching programs, the team may get further and further away from a common outcome and their purpose. Our role as a coach to leaders is to supercharge our coachees to achieve their impossible future. In contrast, our roles as team coaches are to align with the team, to help them to define and understand their collective responsibility for clear objectives, a plan to work together to accomplish objectives, and an expectation that together the team progress will be more rapidly achieved. Often there is an individual one-to-one coaching contract for each member of a team that David and I work with. And this is truly a way to turbo boost the success of a team coaching engagement. So now we'll just look briefly at team coaching. Slide 19, please, David. Partnering with an entire team in an ongoing relationship for the purpose of collectively raising awareness and building better connections in the team's internal and external systems, and enhancing the team's capability to cope with current and future challenges. Achieve performance objectives, improve performance, make things happen faster, make things happen differently, align on a common purpose. Should have moved the slide, I think. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Effectively engage with their key stakeholder groups, collaborate and lean across diversity, achieve performance objectives, develop collective leadership, and jointly transform the wider business. That's pretty powerful. Jointly transform the wider business. David, over to you.
Yeah, and just wanted to talk a little bit more about team coaching and what our role is when we're team coaching and working with a group. When we think of typical facilitation, you know, I'm the consultant, I'm the expert, I come in and I'm speaking to you, I'm sharing some wisdom and some wonderful insights that I have, or I'm doing a team communication assessment and I'm walking through a model and teaching you how to interact and communicate better. That would be typical consulting or facilitation. Team coaching is different in that as coaches, we're coming in and we're working alongside the team. So we're really creating a space for them to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. And we're partnering with the leader in that process. So it may be that we're creating a space for the leader to practice the skills that they need as a leader to help the team to be successful, versus being the expert who's coming in with all the answers, if that makes sense. So it's nuanced. And for those of you who have participated in individual coaching, you'll appreciate that, where our role as coaches isn't to come in with solutions, ideas to bring for you, but rather it's to create the space for you to kind of wade through things, get clarity, get focus, and come up with the solutions that you're going to work towards. So it is nuanced. So in many respects, team coaching almost mirrors that individual coaching relationship in that respect. One of the things that we wanted to do, though, is we wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive in one aspect of team coaching. So earlier on, we talked about purpose and vision as being foundational to a team being effective and being successful. They need to understand why we're here, what we're doing, and how we're adding value. That's absolutely critical. The other element that we wanted to spend just a couple moments on is this idea of psychological safety. This is something that becomes very important for a team to be successful, and also for coaches as we work with teams. And I know when some of you were talking about good experiences and also challenges you had on teams, themes around psychological safety came up. So just like to throw to the room a question for you. When you hear this term psychological safety, what comes to mind for you? Feel free to throw it into the chat. honesty, validation. Okay. What else? Trust, judgment-free. Yeah. Being yourself, confidential, no judgment, constructive feedback, respect for all views. Some great stuff coming here. Oh, I like this. Being able to raise differing opinions without being judged. Safe place to discuss. It's okay to make mistakes. Authenticity. Nice. Space where my words will not be used against me. Ability to make mistakes. Validation of my thoughts, feelings, and ideas. Great. So some good stuff there. Thank you. Two key characteristics of psychological safety are that, one, it's experienced at a group level as opposed to an individual level. And typically in a team, there will be multiple members who have a similar perception to the safety of the environment. And the other piece about psychological safety is that the impact of the team dynamics and the dynamics that exist on the team typically are experienced immediately. It's not a delayed response sort of situation, but when there's not safety, when I feel threatened, when I feel that there's a risk of reprisal, that you feel that right away. It hits us right here. It's on an emotional level. Oh, thank you, Angela. 13 factors of psychological health and safety in the workplace. And there's a whole list there for folks to see. And
Beautiful.
As you were sharing some of your own understandings of psychological safety, you can see how many of the comments you made fit into those 13 factors that Angela shared with us. So here is one definition of psychological safety. So I'll give folks a moment to read. Oh, I didn't realize that, Angela. That was shared with just the panelists. So I'm going to actually pop it in. Oh, there we go. Everyone got it twice. You heard me referencing a comment that Angela had shared. It's now available for all attendees. So here's one definition of psychological safety. An individual's perceptions about the consequences of interpersonal risks in their work environment. It consists of taking for granted beliefs about others will respond when one puts oneself on the line, such as by asking a question, seeking feedback, reporting a mistake, or proposing a new idea. So this general feeling of unsafety. Oftentimes, people will, and we will, what we'll do is we'll interchange this idea of trust and psychological safety. So I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the nuances and differences around those. Psychological safety is a group construct. It generally refers to a group, and that can be experienced in a number of ways. It can be one to many, so me not feeling safe within the team, or it can be many and many, many to many, in contrast to trust, which is more of an individual construct. How I'm feeling and how you're feeling. So it's a one-to-one relationship. Psychological safety measures if it's okay to openly share concepts, to make mistakes, whereas trust measures if another can be counted on to do what they say they're going to do. Psychological safety can be measured by team members knowing if the environment is safe, where trust is measured by an individual's thoughts about another person. Psychological safety gives the team members the benefit of the doubt, where with trust, we're giving another individual the benefit of the doubt to get things done. So it is nuanced, and often you'll hear about the terms being interchanged. We tend to use in a team environment this idea of psychological safety more often than we do trust, although trust does appear and show up when we reference the relationships within a team. Oops, I've expanded my chat instead of moving the slide. Excuse me, folks. when you're in presentation mode, I have the whole screen, so it's sometimes a lot to look at here. This particular model looks at psychological safety and comparison in relation to high standards and high effectiveness as a team. So if you look at the top half of the model, you see this is a team with high psychological safety. On one side, if it's combined with high standards, you sit in the grid in this area of learning and high performance. If you have low standards but high psychological safety, there is a risk of folks sitting in the comfort zone. On the bottom half of the diagram, this is when we're looking at low psychological safety, and we can see the two areas where you may land is if you have low psychological safety and low standards, you could be in the apathy or apathetic zone, versus low psychological safety and high standards creates a space of anxiety. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Okay, so folks, just take a moment and think about some of the experiences you have. I'm not going to ask you to talk specifically about your own team, but just thinking about teams in general, where do you think that most teams fall on this grid? Do you think they fall in the learning and high performance zone, the comfort zone, the apathy zone, or the anxiety zone?
We already have someone, Dominique likes this diagram.
Comfort or anxiety, okay. Between couples, folks saying between comfort and anxiety.
Wow.
Noticing a theme, yeah. And there certainly isn't a right or wrong answer. It's very contextual. Just curious sort of what people thought where things might land. Low safety, high standards. Yeah.
Wow.
And my experience as well in working with teams and as well being a member of a team in my career is that often folks sit in the comfort zone or the anxiety zone. That tends to be the bulk of where I found folks. And visualizing this way can be a really powerful way to sort of make sense. And depending on the psychological safety of the group that you're working on, you can actually do some really interesting exercises and have some great conversation using this diagram. We call it sort of like a landscape model where you can actually have folks position themselves on the floor where they feel the team is sitting, and it can create a really good visual way of getting folks to understand the emotional and the impact of having an unsafe environment, or an environment where even just one person feels that they're constrained, held back in some way, and the impacts that it can have on the entire team.
David?
Yes.
If you look at Cora's response here, I wouldn't know about most teams. Mine was in the anxiety zone. Lots of people coming and going, sick leaves, etc.
Yeah.
That really shows the anxiety zone completely.
Yeah. You know, I've been doing quite a bit of work in British Columbia right now within the health system, where again, health, complex environment when things are going really well, throw in a pandemic and it can get really challenging. And you're seeing a lot of this constant movement, shifting, people making big life decisions and deciding, you know what, I'm going to retire early, I'm going to move to a different role because of some of the stress, anxiety. Very similar to what we mentioned earlier in the session around vision and values and constantly revisiting. Psychological safety is something that we constantly have to have our finger on the pulse of, because Carol, some of the things you mentioned here, sick leaves, you know, new person added to the team, all of these things change the dynamics, and we have to kind of resettle, reset, make sure everyone's okay. We have to make sure, particularly when we're hiring new people and they come into a team, that they feel safe, that they're not bouncing against the culture that we've created as a team, particularly if we have a really strong culture. So it's something that is really critical to constantly be monitoring and be aware of as leaders. And that's one of the roles as coaches, is that over time, the goal is not to be there and be the crutch that the team relies on and the leader relies on to do all these things. But over time, the goal is to build capacity within the team so that they can more easily recognize and address when the dynamic shifts, when we've moved from it's safe, everything's good, to something's happened. How do we adjust? How do we sort of reconfigure and then move forward again? So it's about building that capacity.
One other thing, David.
Yeah.
Noella has asked for the name of the diagram, please.
I will get that to you. This is based on the work of Edmondson. So I will we'll make sure that that's available for folks. But this is Edmondson 2019. The paper that I have doesn't actually have the name, it just has who created the diagram.
Yeah, no problem, thank you.
And the little note on it is how psychological safety relates to performance standards. Okay. So it's critical that as team coaches, and here's sort of a nuance perhaps from a facilitator. So, you know, we had the 13 factors of psychological safety. So I've been in presentations where a facilitator will come in and present all of that information. Here's what a psychologically safe environment looks like. A team coach's impact is a little bit different. Certainly we use models, we use assessments to kind of tease out and collect information and collect data. However, our role is more to come in, to actively listen, to be curious, and where appropriate, challenge folks if they perhaps have a different perception or perhaps they have a blind spot. The role is to support the team in understanding when psychological safety is present, when it's not, and really challenge them to sort of fine-tune their spidey sense to be aware and to notice, as Carol said, when some of these various changes happen, so that they're aware when there's been a shift. Most importantly, though, as team coaches, we're there for a brief amount of time. So typically it's a fairly extended engagement where once a month we're going to spend some time with the team. And those are great. They're informative. We create this safe space for folks to explore, to challenge, take things out to hear, zoom out, zoom in. The most important work for team coaching happens between sessions. So when it comes to psychological safety, often we'll challenge our folks to notice, to pay attention what's going on when they're in different situations, when they're in different contexts. You know, it's great if I'm working with this team here, but now if this team is now presenting to a senior leader in the organization around the boardroom table, what does that look like? How does it feel? How do things shift from one environment to the other? So that context piece is really important.
David, Nancy has a question. What's the best way to create a safe space?
Good question. And my favorite answer to actually pretty much any question, if I'm being honest, is it depends. It depends. It's very contextual. And I think I can speak for Janet and I in the work that we do is that sometimes you don't know where to start. So we often, not all team coaches do this, but we often will do anonymous pre-assessment. So sort of a team culture diagnostic sort of approach, just to get a sense, what's the team doing well? What are some opportunities? What are some gaps? And are there any members who maybe are feeling a bit unsafe? So sometimes what this will do is it'll help us to fine tune where some of the challenges are or where some opportunities are to exist. And that might help us to focus on how to create a safe space. However, as coaches, our role isn't necessarily to go in and create that space, but it's more to engage in dialogue and create a space where folks can have that dialogue out to hear, sort of help them to build understanding. Maybe it's creating a space so someone can feel more heard than they have in the past. And then having the group or the team collectively decide, okay, based on what we heard today, what's the next wise action? What's the next step that we're going to take to try and correct this and remedy this? So in that sense, I would say, to answer your question, it depends, because we typically would not go in with solutions. Now, that being said, Angela shared some key factors of psychological safety, and there are times where there is clearly something going on. There's clearly something that needs to be dealt with, and it may be to the extent that you need to involve HR. There could be a number of interventions that are required. In that case, typically what we would do is that would happen first before we started team coaching. Because again, that solid foundation, if it's not there, it's not going to be effective. It may not be the right intervention at that time for that team.
Also, David, this happens over time. This doesn't happen at the first team coaching session. This is getting to know one another and people opening up and perhaps being a little more vulnerable than they have in the past. Angela said, how about a courageous space? Same kind of thing.
Yeah, so it depends on the language. And Angela, it's actually a great thing that you brought in there, is that each space will have their sort of ways of being, how they show up as a team, their norms. So it's more important to build on what works for the team, language they're familiar with, so that as coaches, we're not coming and just adding one more layer of stuff to process. So that's the shift, I would say, from team coaching to facilitating and consulting, is that we typically don't go in there with a set approach and this is how we're going to do that. And I'm going to talk briefly about that in one of the samples that I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. So coaches, we observe, we role model, we may note and point out behaviors or things that we're noticing, and we become a valuable contributor in helping the team to begin to notice and act on these same things. Again, it's about helping them build the ability and capacity to maintain psychological safety for themselves over time. So oftentimes you'll hear either Janet or us say, our role as coaches and our role as team coaches is to work ourselves out of a job. If the team no longer needs us because they're self-sustaining, we feel that we have been successful. If we're spending too much time with the team, they're becoming too reliant on us as the expert and they're not doing the work.
Hear, hear.
There we go.
Okay. Can we move on to slide 23, please? Thank you. This is going to be, we have about 30 minutes left, David, and we're both going to speak about some team stories. And David's going to be up first, and I think you have two, don't you?
I have a couple. I can share one. And folks, at this stage, I would say this is also a great spot if you have questions, and we can kind of weave them in and see if we can share some examples that might help to answer those questions. Just sort of building on this idea of psychological safety, I want to give an example of a team coaching engagement I did with a startup company here in Vancouver. And this was an interesting one. So oftentimes as a team coach, what would I say? Team coaching has been around for a long time. However, it's also a new concept for many organizations. So Janet talked earlier on about the ICF and EMCC and some of the coaching elements. They're only just sort of getting structure around that. So the ICF, International Coaching Federation, they have just been working on competencies for team coaching, similar to how there's competencies for individual coaching. And their hope is by the end of 2021 that they'll have a designation or an accreditation attached to team coaching. EMCC is a little bit ahead of the game. Janet and I are both accredited with the EMCC, but it's a relatively new concept. So oftentimes in my work, what I find is that I get in the door as a consultant and a facilitator, and then sort of gradually introduce them to team coaching. So one of the examples that I wanted to share that also highlights the difference between facilitating and coaching is this startup that I worked with. So I was working with a director team. There's about 12 of them, and they were having some challenges around communication. So excellent, I came in, I started working with them with a tool called the SDI, or Strengths Deployment Inventory, which is a great tool for what do I value, how do I communicate, what does that look like when I'm in conflict, what strengths do I have, and this type of thing. So did that work and planned a full day. Everyone did their assessments and we planned a full day workshop. And I had it very laid out, you know, from 9 to 10, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this activity. The whole day was mapped out. That is facilitation. There's a set agenda. I had a bunch of stuff I had to get through. Around 11:30 in the morning, I realized that there's some stuff going on here. Little bit lack of clarity, a little bit of lack of transparency, and definitely an issue with psychological safety. So I had a moment, I'm going to be honest, because I had a whole agenda picked out, and this is a bit further back in my career, so I maybe was a little bit kind of having a control issue. So I had to kind of self-coach myself for a little bit. And I came back after lunch and I basically said to folks, here's what I noticed. Here's what I heard. Given this, what would be the best use of our time for the next 3.5 hours? And everyone kind of looked at me because it was clear that they were used to being facilitated. They weren't used to being coached. And so it took about 10, 15 minutes. We were sort of having a bit of discussion. And what we realized is that because of some of the challenges that they were having with their more senior leader, it was creating a space where they didn't necessarily feel safe. And it was getting in the way of their getting value out of the facilitated aspect of the program. So the group decided, you know what, as a group, what if we just spent this afternoon focused on the challenges we're having, decide where we want to go and how we're going to get there. Super powerful moment, super powerful. And so the afternoon was spent really just giving folks a chance to talk, to share their experiences, some of their challenges, and start to formulate a bit of an action plan, how either on an individual or collective basis, they could move forward. So that afternoon was what I would call a pure team coaching session, and a stark contrast from what was planned for the day and from what facilitation is. One of the action items that came out of that session was that they didn't feel that they had effective meetings. They didn't necessarily feel that when they were with senior leadership that they had the ability to share information clearly, be heard, express opinions, challenge ideas, and whatnot. So one of the things as a team coach that we often will do, and what I did in this case, is I was invited to sit in on these meetings, not to facilitate, just to sit back and notice and observe. And they gave me permission, where appropriate, to just sort of pause and say, folks, can we just pause for a moment here? What did you notice just happened? Or did you notice anything? So it created a space where a group of very capable people would then be able to pause, notice patterns that had been deeply ingrained into the dynamics of the team, and interrupt them. So that can be a way that as a coach, as we work, it's not necessarily about coming, presenting a lot of information. It's just about being available in the background to support them as they experiment, learn, and practice new skills and behaviors. So it was a really powerful moment for me as a coach, and really reinforced this need to be able to shift based on the dynamics in the room, because as coaches, we're there for the service of the team, not to get through an agenda. I'll flip it back to you, Janet.
Oh, thanks a lot. That is a pretty powerful story and sounds very successful. For me, I'm just going to talk briefly. I've been on, so not as a team lead coach, I've been an advisor to a team lead coach, and I've also been on 2 individual coachees that were part of a team. And in both situations, well, I'll tell you briefly about the first one. And it was almost a year-long coaching session with one participant of the team. And through that organization, something crazy happened, which is very unusual. And in the team dynamics and the growing together, what happened is the leader of that team opted out of that team, decided that there was no way that they were going to fit in this team any longer, that the team had bonded and were very highly focused on achieving goals, and they threw the drama out. So the leader was a little dramatic and decided that they didn't fit in that team anymore. That team is healthy, strong, and accomplishing great things together. And then the other individual I was coaching on a team coaching, a provincial government actually, and I won't get any farther than that. But the person that I was coaching opted out after several coaching sessions and just said that she would be leaving that team and looking for work elsewhere. So all of these things happen, and it happens through growing together and becoming stronger as a team. And in both of my situations, as I said, one person opted out of that team. They felt that they didn't belong any longer. And to me, it felt almost like a failure to start with. And then I thought, well, it really is a big win because there aren't people there pulling down the team in any respect. Over to you, David.
Yeah, and I thanks very much for that, Janet. Nita had a question about the example that I shared there. How open was the leader to this change in the plan, shifting from facilitation to team coaching? Great question. In this particular case, I had a really good working relationship with the leader who had brought me in for the facilitated session. So I didn't just blindly shift gears. Over the lunch break, when I realized that things were they felt like they were going off the rails, I didn't get into too much detail because I didn't want to influence, but I just said, hey, would you be comfortable with me perhaps shifting gears a little bit if that's the direction that the team wants to go? That's basically all I said. That's not the exact words, but just, are you comfortable with the shift if the team wants to go? And she says, yeah, run with it. It brings up, Nita, it brings up a really valuable point though about team coaching. I'm sure there's a few coaches, internal coaches on the line, or folks who are familiar with coaching language. In coaching, we often talk a lot about contracting. And contracting is, getting a clear focus on, if I'm talking one-to-one, what are we going to talk about today? Where would we like to focus our time? What's going to add the most value? And trying to keep on that so that, again, we get value. Sometimes we'll get in these conversations where you're talking about so many different things and you get to the end and it's like, what is the plan here? So having that contract is really important. In team coaching, it's contracting on steroids, in that because the team is guiding the direction, we constantly have to be revisiting. And before you get into a true team coaching engagement, you would actually contract with the leader as well, as far as what the focus is going to be, what you're going to work on, then go to the team. The team's going to provide their input, you'd recontract again. And there's this constant checking in, are we headed the right direction for you? So in that sense, team coaching is actually even more focused than individual coaching, because you tend to really be focused in on a key area that the team is working towards with defined outcomes. So that checking in, particularly if there's a shift in the room, is really important. Thanks, Cora. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So in the room, I would do the exact same thing, sort of like those meetings where I would pause and interrupt and say, I'm noticing, or did anyone notice? Check in with the room. They may be okay to keep going what they're doing, or they may in that moment decide to recontract and say, let's explore this a little bit more. So thank you for bringing that up, Nita. This idea of checking in, communicating, contracting is really, really important. It's 1:45. I'll share one more example that sort of speaks a little bit about that. I've been doing some work with a scientific research organization here based in BC, and it's true consulting facilitation in that there's 40-something leaders participating. So we did some emotional intelligence work. There was a little bit of one-on-one coaching. What I find as a team coach is I like to spend more time in that space, because when you're working with a team in this sort of curious, open space sort of environment, magic happens. It's really powerful, the impacts it can have on the team. So I was trying to use some of those approaches, but realizing it wasn't working that well. And what I realized in working with this team is that you can't effectively do team coaching with 42 people. It's too big. There's too many different things going on. And if we go back to the very outset when Janet was talking about what makes a team, typically teams tend to be smaller, 6, 8, maybe 10 folks, very clearly aligned on purpose and whatnot. In this group that I was working with, when you have just over 40 people, you have representation from the entire organization and a collection of teams. So when we start to really drilling into what's your purpose, what value are you bringing here, there was very, very disparate and different responses to that, because they weren't truly teams. They were a leadership team of a very large organization, but they weren't operating as teams. So it made me realize in that particular situation that we actually had to break everyone up, and we ended up breaking up into 6 different groups. They self-organized into the actual teams that were more aligned in vision and purpose and whatnot. And then there was some huge impactful change in the organization, because now each team could get really clear on what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they wanted to do it. And then as you zoomed out to the bigger system of all 6 of these teams, you started to be able to then understand how they interconnected and the dynamics that were required between each of the teams, so that the bigger leadership team could be effective as a whole. So it was a really great experience and a great learning thing for me about really, again, going back to that core foundation piece of purpose. Are we truly a team? Because if we are truly a team, then that's where the magic can happen. If this isn't a team, what do we need to do to shift that, to realign folks or to adjust the composition so that we have that solid foundation from which to launch? I'm going to stop talking there, Janet.
I was just going to say, it's all around discussion and being open and knowing what the objectives are at the outset. We call it contracting. It works. Okay, Barbara, 3 key methodologies: business objectives, team interactions, leader interpersonal behaviors. We have a very engaged group of people here today, David. I'm really happy that we've been here. If you can move to slide 24, I'm going to do a little bit of a summary, and then I'm going to hand it off to you to, what is the maximum recommended amount of people for team coaching? Probably have 16 at the most.
It would depend on who you speak to. We've talked a lot about David Clutterbuck and Peter Hawkins. They're going to say probably 6 to 8.
Okay.
If you're getting to a larger group, it may be more facilitation. But yeah, they would say 6 to 8. I know some folks who do larger. The bigger you get, the question you have to ask, is this truly a team? Because a leadership team could be managing a huge varied functions of the business, which have different objectives and priorities and values. So I would say the majority are going to say probably smaller, and in some exceptional cases a larger team.
So the teams that we're working with currently have split into now nine each, so 2 teams. It was going to be 18, and it's not going to work that way. So I just wanted to say thank you very much. We've covered a lot. It was like fire hose team coaching, and we hope that we really filled you in on why team coaching, why we see the huge value in it. I just think about all the kids that are coming out of school that have never done an assignment on their own. They've gone through school as part of a team and been very successful. they're coming into the organizations. They want to be part of a team. We compared and contrasted team coaching versus individual coaching, theory and practice of team coaching, taking a deep dive into psychological safety. Thank you, David. Stories of team coaching, which could go on a long time, but we are really done and would like to leave a little bit of time. We've got 10 minutes for some questions and answers. So if someone wants to put up their hand, I believe that we can bring you into the room. Alexandra has mentioned that we can do that. So if we have someone that wants to participate, we'd love to see you here.
Yes, you're welcome to raise your hand. Vous êtes invité à lever la main si vous voulez participer.
And if you feel more safe and want to type it, that's okay too. This is
Yeah,
a safe environment.
Yeah, for now it's very safe for sure. So if you don't want to come on camera, please raise your hand and or type in the chat so we can answer any questions before we go. We're both hoping that there was some value here for you today, and it will help you think about moving forward with your teams.
Everyone's quiet.
I was going to say,
I was
do
going
we
to say
have
it's
to sing and
lunchtime,
dance?
but is virtual team coaching still as effective as in person? That's an interesting one, and I would imagine you'll get varying opinions. I can only speak about my own personal experience, is that I find in a face-to-face environment, there are some folks who it doesn't work as well for, and then similarly in virtual. I had an interesting experience with a team recently where the team prior to the pandemic was a dispersed team. So you had folks in the office and then workers dispersed all across Canada. And when they moved into the pandemic, everyone now was working remotely. The folks that were previously dispersed felt more engaged and attached to the team than they ever had, because of course leadership was making more of an effort to connect everyone. So what I would say is that virtual can be very effective, and it works. It just requires a little bit of extra effort on the coach or facilitator's part to engage folks. So typically, as an example here, this was very much us speaking to you and us sharing lots of information. In a virtual setting, we break things up substantially. We break people into breakout rooms, smaller rooms. We use a virtual whiteboard. So we do a whole bunch of things to engage people in various ways. From a psychological safety point of view, my experience has been that people seem to find a lot of comfort in hiding behind a screen. So I worked with a team where we started out face-to-face, then we moved to virtual, and I was a little bit concerned how it was going to go. There was some folks who previously had kind of a quiet voice. I really had to push to tease out something from them, get them to respond. That when they got into the virtual space, they just came alive. And I was shocked. I'm like, who is this person? So I think that it can work. It can be effective. In both of our experience, we've had folks that we've only started working with since the pandemic. So it's only been virtual, but there's been a really strong connection and a really good dynamic. So it can work. It's just about creating that space and making sure to meet people where they're at.
David, I'm going to stop you because we have a couple of really interesting questions. When addressing psychological safety, how do you maintain the line between coaching and counseling? And the other one, do you have any recommended tools to build psychological safety? I'm waiting for you to answer. I'm reading the questions because they're moving again now.
Yeah, for those of you who are familiar with ICF, we absolutely have very high standards and ethics around, when does it shift from counseling to coaching. So it is a delicate line because even if we come in a business sense, things get personal fast. It's hard to separate the two. So it's really important for us to be very clear at the outset what our role is as coaches, And if we feel things shifting, if we feel that we're sort of crossing that gray line, two things: you sort of need to hold the space for folks to be able to share and feel safe to share. And then depending on where it goes, you know, a side conversation or a recommendation to have a conversation with HR or reach out to the employee assistance program, if it's sort of crossing that gray line. It is tricky. It is tricky, and it's tricky because we're there to create a safe space. And if someone now feels comfortable to share something or engage in a conversation that maybe is within the gray area, if we clamp down on it too quick, we may just scare them back into their shell, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very delicate balance that we work really hard to maintain, to ensure that we're not crossing that line, we're not opening anyone in the room up to any risk, but also giving them the space to be able to open up.
Thank you, David.
Sorry, there was a comment. Dominique, I'm going to go to the next slide just so you have our contact information, and I'll keep talking here. Tools for building psychological safety. I'd be a little bit curious to know a little bit more about that, Nita, on an individual level, on a team level. So perhaps that might be something we could communicate with a bit more offline to understand a little bit more context about that.
Absolutely. And for the master certified coaches who wish to develop expertise in team coaching, David and I both participated in education, actually the inaugural, the very first team coaching training out of Europe through Global Team Coaching. And I believe that they're probably going to run, I don't know, another session fairly soon. David, do you know for sure?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm going to be honest. There's a bit of flurry in the market around team coaching right now. So, Francis, what I would say, pop us a note, and we can happy to get on a call and share some of our experiences, having participated in a number of different sessions, to make sure, one, you get something that's right for you, but also that you're going to get the most value out of. Because I think there's, just like anything, there's varying levels of quality. So happy to share our experiences with you. In the virtual space, are participants using their voices or chat more? I would say, from my experience, if you let them, they'll use chat more. I'm actually pretty, I like to push people. And so I encourage them as much as I can without making them uncomfortable to use their voices. One, because they don't want to hear Janet and I speaking all the time. It adds variety to the room, but I think it's good for folks, and it helps people to remain connected in a different way versus just listening and chatting. So we definitely encourage voices more than chat.
And with that, we're at 3 minutes, folks. I enjoyed being here. It went fast. I thought it was going to drag. So thank you for listening to us. And yeah, I hope that you look into team coaching. I think it's the way to go. But as David said, I would be careful. It seems like everybody's hopping on the bandwagon. And just like coaching, we want to have professional designations to go with it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the engagement. We've got this massive chat full of wonderful information that Janet and I are going to go back and look at. I know that the session will be available. I believe the deck, but for sure the recording will be available, made available via the government site. Alexander's probably going to talk about this. I see him appearing on camera. And as well, our contact information is here. So we are happy to get on a chat, talk about specifics with you, share our experiences. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Janet. That was a really very interesting session. It was great. We will share all the documents. They will be on GC Collabs. And if you have any questions, you can also contact France